What happens when a black woman walks into a luxury bank just to withdraw $1,000? Most wouldn't bat an eye. But in the wealthiest bank in Manhattan, where race, clothing, and silence are judged before words ever leave your mouth, she wasn't seen as a client. She was seen as a threat, a fraud, a nobody. They laughed. They live-streamed. They threw her out, until the man she married walked in. And with 5 words, he burned the institution to the ground. She walked into Magnolia Bank with her shoulders squared and her head held high, not with arrogance, but with the kind of quiet dignity that people often mistake for pride. Her name was Amara Hill. She wore a plain cream blouse, a pair of black slacks that had faded gently with time, and loafers that bore the scuffs of responsibility, not carelessness. Her skin was a rich bronze, glowing in the morning light that poured through the tall windows of the lobby. Her natural curls were pulled into a neat low bun. She didn't wear jewelry. She didn't carry a designer bag. She didn't need to. The security guard glanced at her for no more than a second and dismissed her. A black woman in plain clothes. She must have been lost. The marble lobby, grand and ostentatious, reeked of wealth and exclusion. A chandelier worth more than most annual salaries hung above her head. The floor beneath her shoes was polished to a blinding shine. Magnolia Bank wasn't for everyone. That was the unspoken rule, and everyone here knew it. Amara stepped forward, a withdrawal slip tucked neatly in her hand. Her tote bag, a canvas thing with frayed edges and a small keychain that read, "Grace, not gold," swung gently by her side. She approached the first open window. The teller, a white woman with frosty blonde hair, pulled into a tight ponytail, looked up at her, blinked once, and then slowly blinked again, as though she were trying to remember where she'd seen this woman before. Or rather, how someone like this woman had ended up on her side of the counter. "Yes?" the teller said, her tone polite but sharp, like a butter knife pressed against the skin. "I'd like to withdraw $1,000, please," Amara replied calmly, sliding the slip across the counter. "1,000, the teller repeated, eyebrows rising ever so slightly. She tilted her head, eyes flicking down to Amara's clothes, then to the withdrawal slip again. "Cash?" "Yes, from my checking account." A pause, then a small, practiced smile that didn't reach the woman's eyes. "May I see your ID?" Amara handed it over without hesitation. Her fingers were steady. Her heart was not. The teller, whose name tag read Heather, studied the ID with the intensity of someone trying to solve a mystery. "I'll need to verify some information," she said, and vanished behind a paneled wall, taking Amara's ID with her. Amara stood there, aware of every glance, every phone screen lifted just high enough to snap a photo, without permission. She wasn't causing a scene. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't done anything but ask for money that belonged to her. Yet the room seemed to shrink around her. The whispers began like a drizzle. Is she even a client? She looks like she walked in off the street. Maybe she found someone's checkbook. A woman in a fitted pink dress clutched her designer handbag closer as she passed. A man in a Rolex leaned over to whisper something to the teller at the next window, and they both smirked. When Heather returned, her expression had changed. It was tighter now, tinged with suspicion. "There's an issue with your account," she said in a tone that suggested accusation rather than assistance. "Please wait while we verify." "I've had this account for years," Amara said gently. "I understand," Heather said, but her smile had vanished entirely. She motioned to someone behind the counter. A tall white man in a suit, clean-shaven and polished, appeared beside her. He wore a lapel pin with the Magnolia Bank crest. The assistant manager. He didn't introduce himself. "Ma'am," he said, "we'll need to ask you a few questions." And just like that, Amara understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't about a banking policy or a system error. This was a test, a quiet, rehearsed form of dismissal, cloaked in protocol. Because in places like this, being a black woman meant always being suspect until proven worthy. Even when the money was yours, even when the math was simple, even when you followed every rule. She looked up at the massive chandelier above her, then around the lobby, where everyone pretended not to be watching, but couldn't look away. Her blouse wasn't wrinkled, her ID wasn't fake, her money wasn't missing, but her presence here was a problem. And they were about to make sure she felt that. The assistant manager didn't offer a seat. He didn't ask her to step aside discreetly. He gestured curtly for Amara to follow him. Past the velvet rope, away from the teller windows, to a small alcove near the entrance. Not an office, not even a meeting room. Just a glass panel corner, meant for public reprimands, dressed up as customer care. "Ms. Hill," he said, his tone clipped, professional in the way that stripped her of humanity. "We're having difficulty verifying your account details. You'll need to wait here until we clarify a few things." "I provided my ID," she said, her voice still calm. "And my account number is on the withdrawal slip." "Yes, we're aware," he said. "But due to some irregularities, we're going to need a bit more information." "What irregularities?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Heather and said loudly enough for the lobby to hear, "Call security, just as a precaution." The word landed like a gavel on stone. Amara blinked once, slowly, but she didn't flinch. A black security guard appeared moments later. Middle-aged, stocky, with a kind face that quickly hardened when he realized who he was being asked to monitor. He didn't speak, just stood nearby, arms crossed. That was when the murmurs in the lobby sharpened into whispers, audible now, purposeful. "I told you she was up to something. Look at her. Who withdraws 1,000 in cash like that? I bet she's trying to scam the bank." Two white women, both draped in pastel suits and pearl earrings, stared openly. One nudged the other. "Remember that lady last month? Same look, same story, probably a trend." Behind them, a man in a Burberry trench coat smirked. Maybe she thought no one would notice if she dressed like the cleaning crew. Laughter followed, tight, smug, meant to sting. Phones began to lift again, quiet clicks of cameras capturing the moment. Not her words, not her story, just her face, her posture, her race. That would be enough to go viral. Amara turned her eyes to the glass, seeing her reflection there. Simple, clean, grounded. Not a stain, not a threat. But still, they stared like she was fire in a museum. Then came the voice. "Is this going on YouTube?" A teenage boy snickered, holding his phone a little higher. "Somebody get the thumbnail. Black Karen tries to rob a bank with vibes." Another voice joined. "Bet she's gonna cry and pull the race card." Amara's spine remained straight. Her gaze didn't flicker. But inside, the storm gathered. Thunder silent, but real. She was used to this. The misjudged glances, the second guessing, the disbelief that she could own, deserve, or belong. But this was different. This was deliberate. Bradley, his name finally offered by a badge clipped to his tailored suit, returned with a printed document. "We don't see any recent transactions in this account," he said, waving the paper like a verdict. Nothing that suggests you'd be withdrawing $1,000 today. Amara frowned gently. That's because I made a transfer yesterday, from a linked savings account. And yet, he said, his voice rising for the room, nothing is showing. That's concerning, don't you agree? From across the room, Heather piped in. Should we call the authorities, just in case? No, Bradley replied, his voice oozing righteousness. Let's give her a chance to explain herself. Amara's breath caught for half a second. Then she stepped forward, holding out her phone. I can show you the confirmation. It's right here. But he didn't take the phone. Instead, he glanced at the guard. You seeing this? He said. Now she wants to show us her phone. We all know how easy it is to Photoshop a confirmation. That got more laughs. A man with a golf visor and a Starbucks cup said, Y'all ever notice it's always the broke ones that want to act like they're misunderstood? And someone else shouted, If she had money, she wouldn't look like that. The cruelty wasn't just casual. It was curated. Each word was another slap, another push meant to provoke. They wanted her to snap, to lose her temper, to prove their prejudice right. But she didn't. Instead, Amara drew herself taller. She slipped her phone back into her tote. And she said, with a voice so calm, it cut through the rising noise, You've made your assumptions. Now you're making a scene. I just asked to withdraw what's mine. Bradley chuckled, but there was a tension in his jaw now. Lady, he said, this is Magnolia Bank, not some place where people come in off the street and demand money with a smile. You want to talk about what's yours? Go prove it in court. There it was. The declaration. Not of suspicion, but of rejection. Not because her numbers didn't match, but because her skin did. And as the guard moved closer, as the phones clicked louder, and as Heather whispered into her headset something about incident protocol, Amara stood in the center of the lobby, beneath the chandelier, beneath their judgment. Still, silent, watching them bury themselves in their own arrogance, brick by brick, because they didn't know who she was. But they were about to find out. The murmur in the lobby swelled into a wave, not from fear, but from the kind of hunger that only humiliation can feed. Phones angled in like sharks circling a wounded seal, and the manager, Bradley, fed them willingly. Check her bag, he said flatly. Amara blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. Bradley didn't look at her, as if even acknowledging her directly was beneath him. He addressed the security guard instead. We have to protect our clients. If she's trying to steal, we need to know now. Vince hesitated. Sir, she hasn't. I said check the bag. Bradley's voice sliced through the hesitation. Unless you want to explain to our legal department why you let a potential fraud walk out the front door. The second guard, a younger white man with a crew cut, stepped forward. Ma'am, he said, more nervous than aggressive. Please open your tote. Amara stayed still. This is a violation, she said, her voice even. You have no cause, no warrant. I came here to withdraw my money. You came here to make a scene, Bradley snapped. You think because you're... He paused. Didn't say the word. He didn't have to. His eyes said it all. You get to act like we owe you something? The crowd froze in that moment, waiting to see how far he'd go. Then Heather raised her phone, camera facing Amara. Go ahead, she said almost gleefully. Show us what's in the bag. It wasn't a request. It was a demand made under the weight of white entitlement, under the dome of a marble bank, where the glass ceilings were reinforced with steel and silence. Amara slowly set her tote on the counter. Her movements were deliberate, elegant even. As she unzipped it, she kept her eyes on no one and everyone. Inside were the same items she'd entered with: her wallet, her ID, the printed withdrawal slip, and a neatly folded scarf with her grandmother's initials sewn into the corner. She pulled the scarf out and set it on the counter, then the wallet, then the folded slip. The room was silent, the kind of silence that only surrounds public executions, the kind that waits for the blood. "That's it," she said. But that wasn't enough. Bradley reached forward, snatched the slip, and held it up for the room. "Withdrawal, $1,000. He read aloud like it was a confession. "Tell me, Ms. Hill, is this some kind of social experiment? Did you come here to make a TikTok about how the poor live?" The comment dropped like a hammer. Laughter burst around the lobby. Someone clapped. A teenager whistled. A white woman in a crisp green blazer leaned over to her friend and said, "They always want to play victim. Look at her. Probably works at a diner and thinks we should hand over thousands just for showing up." Amara didn't speak, not because she was afraid, but the words wouldn't do justice to the depth of what she felt. Vince, the older guard, stepped forward quietly, lowering his voice to Bradley. "We're escalating this too fast. She hasn't done anything." Bradley hissed back, "Do you want to lose your job?" Vince paused, his jaw clenched, and in that moment, the younger guard, trying too hard to impress, lifted the scarf and shook it out, just in case something might fall from it. Nothing did. But even that motion, that small unspoken assumption, was enough to draw gasps. "She's got nothing," someone said. "No account, no money, just attitude." "That's what entitlement looks like," someone whispered. That word, entitlement, spun in Amara's ears like a curse. She thought of her parents. Her mother sewed until her hands blistered so Amara could go to school. She thought of her own late nights, her scholarship, the 5 jobs she held to make it through college. She thought of every boardroom she'd supported her husband in, every speech she'd written behind the scenes, every pitch deck she'd reviewed while cooking dinner barefoot in a 1-bedroom apartment. Entitlement? She swallowed. "I've asked to speak to the branch director," she said again. Her voice, soft but steely, cut through the mockery. Bradley rolled his eyes. "The branch director," he scoffed, "doesn't meet with—" But he didn't finish the sentence. Because just then, the outer doors hissed open, and the air shifted, as if the building itself sensed something different entering. A black SUV had pulled up just outside. The driver stepped out first, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black. Then came a man in a tailored navy suit, his expression unreadable, but unmistakably lethal. Not in violence, but in the presence. It was him. It was Ezra Blake. Amara didn't turn around. She didn't have to. The whisper rushed across the marble like wind through glass. "That's him. That's Ezra Blake. The billionaire. The CEO of Monarch Holdings. The man who once bought a failing airline with cash and turned it into an empire." He didn't look angry. He looked like judgment carved in bone and breath. And he was walking straight toward the woman they'd all just spent 10 minutes destroying. The same woman whose scarf still sat, unfolded, on the marble counter. Ezra Blake's steps echoed across the marble floor like a slow verdict. Every head turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the low background music in the lobby seemed to falter. For a moment, time bent around him. He was a presence you didn't just see, you felt. 6'3", tailored navy suit cut like armor, skin a rich espresso tone, and a face that wore silence better than most wore words. His eyes scanned the crowd with a surgical calm. Every movement is calculated, efficient, Exact. Bradley stepped back instinctively, suddenly unsure of everything, from his tie pin to his job. Ezra didn't look at him. He didn't look at Marissa, who was now pale and twitching with anxiety behind the teller line. He walked straight to Amara, the same woman they had searched, insulted, and laughed at. She was still standing, her tote now empty, scarf unfolded, posture straight, despite everything. Ezra stopped beside her and reached for her hand. His fingers brushed hers gently, grounding her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, only for her. Amara nodded once. "I'm fine." Then he turned, and when Ezra Blake turned to face a room, you could feel the entire weight of his legacy settle into place. His gaze swept over Bradley, over the two security guards, over the phones still recording, and finally, it landed on Marissa. "I'd like to speak to the branch director," Ezra said, his tone even. "Now." The crowd froze. Marissa fumbled with her mic. "Sir, the director isn't—" "He's here," Ezra cut in. Because of course he was. And right on cue, a man in a gray suit burst out from a hallway near the back. Edward Langston. Silver hair, frantic eyes. The branch director. He was out of breath, and already apologizing. "Mr. Blake, I wasn't informed you'd be visiting today. We would have prepared." "I didn't come for a meeting," Ezra said. "I came for my wife." Gasps rippled across the lobby like an earthquake. Bradley blinked. "Wife?" Ezra didn't repeat it. He didn't need to. Because suddenly, everything changed. The woman they mocked for her blouse. The woman they laughed at for requesting $1,000. The woman they treated like she didn't belong. She was Mrs. Amara Blake, wife of one of the most powerful men in the country. The billionaire who owned the building they were standing in. And just like that, the room turned to ash. Phones lowered. Hands trembled. Edward, the director, took a shaky step forward. I'm terribly sorry. We had no idea." Ezra raised a hand, silencing him. "Exactly," he said. He looked at Bradley, whose face had gone sheet white. "At which point," Ezra asked, his voice steely, "did you decide my wife didn't deserve basic respect?" No one spoke. He turned to Vince, the older security guard, who looked down, ashamed. Then to the younger one, who visibly trembled. Then finally, to Marissa, who was now clutching the counter as if it might save her. Ezra took a breath, then calmly. She came here to withdraw $1,000 from her own account. No lies. No threats, no complaints, and instead of serving her, your staff mocked her clothes, searched her, live-streamed her, and publicly accused her of theft. His eyes locked on Bradley. "And you authorized that?" Bradley tried to speak, but only managed. I didn't know who she was." Ezra stepped closer. "That's the problem," he said. "You shouldn't need to know someone's name to treat them with dignity." A beat. "And you?" he added, now looking at Marissa. "You thought humiliating a black woman would be entertainment." Marissa's lips parted. "Sir, I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," Ezra cut in. "You performed for that crowd. You live-streamed her pain." He turned to the digital screen above the teller line. "Clara," he said, and from the SUV outside, a woman stepped forward, tablet in hand. She walked briskly into the room, composed, unbothered. "Yes, Mr. Blake," she replied, already syncing her device to the lobby's display. Numbers appeared, fast, bright, climbing. "I want every personal, corporate, and trust account tied to Monarch Holdings closed from Regent Crest Bank," Ezra said. "Effective immediately." The screen pulsed. The lobby gasped. 27 accounts. Over $3. $4 billion in assets. Gone. Someone dropped their phone. Bradley stumbled backward. Edward turned gray. Amara stood beside her husband in silence. She hadn't raised her voice once, but in that moment, she was the most powerful person in the room. The numbers on the lobby screen blinked in real time. Millions, then hundreds of millions vanishing from Regent Crest's books. The sound was nothing, but the silence it created was thunderous. Clients stared at the screen, some gasping, some fumbling to check their own accounts. The phones in the hands of employees and customers alike now shook not with amusement, but with fear. Marissa backed into the counter, her voice a brittle whisper. You can't just move that much. Not at once. Ezra turned to her, expression unreadable. It's already done. Clara, still tapping on her tablet, looked up. Transfers confirmed. Regulatory notifications dispatched. Media alerts prepared. She paused. Also, sir, your public statement is now trending. Over 2 million impressions in the last 20 minutes. Ezra didn't flinch, but Marissa did, because her name was being tagged alongside it. Marissa Klein, Regent Crest, racist, viral. Bradley stumbled forward, his voice cracking. Please, this isn't necessary. It was a mistake, a misjudgment. Ezra cut him off. No, what you did was systemic. You saw a black woman in simple clothes, and you treated her like trash. You turned her into a spectacle. The cameras were now rolling not for humiliation, but for reckoning. Amara stepped forward, her voice soft but unwavering. You mocked me for asking for $1,000, but now you're watching 3 billion leave because you didn't have the decency to pause and ask who I was. Or better yet, to ask yourself why you felt entitled to treat me that way. She looked around the lobby. You laughed, you filmed, you piled on because you assumed I couldn't fight back. The silence was suffocating. Then Clara raised her voice. Effective immediately, by Mr. Blake's order, the following staff are terminated. Marissa Klein, teller. Bradley Rowe, branch operations manager. And security staff, Vince Foster and Marcus Levin, for failure to protect a client from harassment. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Bradley staggered. Please, Mr. Blake, I have a family. Ezra's voice was cold. So does every woman you've ever treated this way. Vince, the older guard, simply removed his earpiece and nodded. He didn't argue. He had watched it all unfold. His silence had made him complicit. Clara continued. Branch Director Edward Langston is suspended pending a full audit. His failure to intervene and supervise his staff has triggered an immediate compliance review. Edward didn't protest. He just looked deflated. Around the lobby, clients began moving. Some went toward the exit. Some went toward the front desk, demanding their funds be withdrawn or accounts transferred. The panic spread like ink in water. One woman, in a crisp gray dress, shouted, "You made a mockery of a black woman, and now you've made this bank a national disgrace. I'm pulling everything. You should be ashamed." A man in a suit holding a leather briefcase muttered, "This will be on every network by noon. Regent Crest is done." And it was. The collapse had begun. Social media was on fire. Amara Blake trended worldwide. Hashtags like Regent Collapse, Banking While Black, and Blake Justice lit up the digital sky. News anchors broke live coverage. Breaking. Billionaire Ezra Blake shuts down $3.4 billion in accounts after wife Amara is racially profiled at Regent Crest Bank. Marissa tried to move toward the exit, but cameras followed. The crowd that once cheered her now whispered with venom. That's her. She was laughing. She live-streamed the whole thing, for clout. She mocked a billionaire's wife like she was nothing. Marissa's hands shook as she tried to shield her face, but it was too late. Her reputation was already in ashes. Bradley sat down on the marble floor, tie loosened, his face pale. Ezra didn't look at him again. Amara simply picked up her tote, now filled again with her belongings, and walked back to her husband's side. "I didn't want revenge," she said aloud, her voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. "I just wanted $1,000 and a little respect." She turned to go. Ezra placed a gentle hand on her back. They walked together through the same doors she had been dragged toward only an hour earlier. But now the lobby didn't just part for them. It stood still, in awe. 2 weeks later, the Regent Crest building stood quiet behind caution tape, its once polished windows reflecting nothing but shame. Federal regulators had swept through, seizing internal documents. Marissa Klein's name trended for 5 days, first as a villain, then as a warning. Bradley's LinkedIn vanished. The branch director was gone. Their careers, their power, their prestige, gone with a single truth. But that wasn't the legacy. Amara Blake was. She hadn't spoken to the media. She hadn't posted a single word. And yet her silence rang louder than 1,000 interviews. The story had traveled far beyond New York. On the south side of Chicago, a young black girl named Jayla watched the video of Amara's quiet strength in her bedroom, then pulled out her sketchbook and wrote across the first page. "Amara taught me not to shrink." In Houston, a group of small business owners created a fund to support black and brown women who'd been denied loans without cause. They named it the Blake Fund. In Washington, D.C., a bill was proposed mandating anti-bias training for all national financial institutions, its authors citing the Blake case as the emotional impetus. But none of that compared to the woman herself. At the new community branch of Unity Trust Bank, launched just outside of Harlem, Amara stood quietly as children from the neighborhood cut a red ribbon with golden scissors. She didn't give a speech. She didn't wear designer heels. Just that same quiet blouse and calm smile. A young reporter approached her, nervous but curious. "Mrs. Blake, what do you hope comes from all of this?" Amara's answer was simple. Dignity. She looked at the girl with a kindness that melted the edge of the camera's lens. "I want my daughter, when she's old enough to walk into a bank, to be seen not by her skin, or her shoes, or her silence, but by her right to stand in that space, just like anyone else." The crowd nodded. Ezra stood beside her, silent as always. Not because he lacked the words, but because this was her victory, her story, her mark on a world too long tilted away from women like her. As the sun dipped low across the Harlem skyline, Amara stepped into the lobby of Unity Trust, hand in hand with her husband. Above the entrance hung a plaque, small and modest. It read, "This branch is dedicated to every woman who was ever told she didn't belong, until she proved she did. In honor of Amara Blake." And just like that, a new standard was born, not of wealth or silence or fear, but of truth. Because sometimes all it takes to change the world is a woman in a wrinkled blouse asking for her dignity back and never settling for less again. If this story stirred something in you, about justice, about pride, about the quiet power of being underestimated, then don't let it end here. Share it. Speak it. Remember it. So that no one, no matter their skin, their silence, or the shoes on their feet, ever has to prove they belong in a place meant for all. Like, comment, subscribe. Because respect isn't worn, it's earned, and it should be given. Sometimes, all it takes to change the world is a woman in a wrinkled blouse asking for her dignity and refusing to settle for anything less. You see, this story isn't fiction. It's a mirror. According to the American Banking Association, Black clients are 87% more likely to be questioned for routine transactions than their white counterparts. Not because of policy, but because of perception. What you just witnessed was not a tragedy. It was a test of how we treat people who don't look rich enough, act confident enough, or fit the mold we've been taught to trust. She didn't just lose faith in a bank. She made the world lose faith in it too. And the cruelest part? If her billionaire husband hadn't walked in, you never would have heard this story.